for being here. Tonight we're going to talk about gender equality in Italy. We're going to gender inequality in Italy, which we would like to not have to see anymore. We're going to have a couple of presentations, but we also would like very much to have a discussion with you afterwards. Just quickly, my name is Chiara Capraro. I'm from Italy, I'm from Vicenza. I've been living in London for almost 3 years now, and I work in policy for an international NGO here in London. I met Alberica and Tetra through a group work that we did together with other people as well that we might talk about a bit more in detail later. This is the second event that they are prepared under Fonderia Oxford to talk about gender inequality in Italy. So it's good that we can have another occasion to discuss this issue. So I just give it over to Tekla to present Fonderia.
As I said, we're talking about data culture and policies. I'm going to do the data part. I hope not to bore you too much with statistics. And work in Italy. I'm sure most of you know that work is a big problem in Italy in general, not for women, just for women. With quite a high unemployment rate and over 40% unemployment rate amongst young people. The picture is particularly bleak for women, who only work at about 50%. It's not very good, it's even worse in the south. And as you can see, we're doing worse than everyone else in Europe, or except for Greece and Malta, but I'm not sure that counts. Sweden, Finland, and Denmark are, of course, always the best when it comes to gender equality, but we're doing much worse in places like the UK and France, even Cyprus and Slovenia and whatever. So, considering we're one of the largest countries and largest economies in the EU, we really don't compare anywhere near the other biggest economies. So this is the historical data, and it shows that over the past 20 odd years, employment has increased by about 10%, which isn't great, I would say. But female unemployment has done a bit better compared to men. During the crisis, as you can see, the blue line drops down quite a bit more than the female, who remain approximately the same. I think we can say from about 2005, nothing has changed. So there's been no improvement in employment rates for women over the past 8 years. It's not just unemployment and inactivity, but the women who do work tend to be in atypical contracts. So quite a high percent of women work part-time or have contracts at tempo determinato, temporary contracts. So compared to men, and the majority of men just have standard contracts. So it's not just that. The fact that women work part-time and aren't in work all the time means that they earn less, and they're likely, to progress a lot less in their career. And this is the amount of time the men and women spend with their children. So we're going to look again at female unemployed in the couple. And in that case, the woman spends barely any time playing with the children, whereas over half of the time that the men spend with the children is playing. I'm not sure if that counts as childcare. Where the female is employed, it's exactly the same. The men spend most of their time playing with the children, sometimes taking care of them, but that is obviously bared mostly by the women. And this is the percentage of the time of how they spend their time. So if you count that the women are spending more of twice the time compared to the men, the difference is even bigger. So that's it as it comes to the numbers, and as you would say in Italy, tanti auguri figli maschi, especially Flavia. It's a boy.
Inequality and gender, when we talk about gender and inequality, what do we mean? So I'm going to give you a very brief explanation of what the gender factor is and how it works, what do we mean by a patriarchal society, and what are the main values that the society promotes. what is the position, and then we're going to devote some attention to men, which is something that is more rarely talked about. When we talk about gender inequality, when we say gender, we always think women, and we're going to talk about both women and men. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what the obstacles are between the obstacles on the way to equality, and in the end talking about some possibilities of improving the situation where we can try to attack to the system. So the gender factor, the first and most important, the first important starting point is to understand that gender is a structural, not a lateral issue. What do we mean by that? Understanding gender as a lateral issue implies an emancipatory model. You basically give the same rights to people who didn't have those rights within a system that remains unchanged. Conversely, understanding gender as a structural factor takes us to understand gender equality as transformative, so transforming the whole system. Basically, we don't want to give the same thing, including power in the dominating sense, to women. We want to change the values that a society values. The gender factor. Gender works on many levels, from individual to collective, from psychological to socio-political, and there's a continuum between education and politics. What do we mean by psychological level? It's a binary distribution of traits between the genders, what we call stereotypes, gender stereotypes. While on socio-political level, this is the division between the division of labor and the social spaces. Binary distribution of traits. Women and men are educated differently. Since they are born, they are expected to be different from each other. And we have an understanding of ethics and an understanding of psychological traits that are different for men and women. And often these characteristics are organized in pairs. So for one characteristic, the woman has one, the man has the other. Traditionally, stereotypes maintain that we've got a pole of passivity on the feminine side and activity on the masculine side. Weakness versus strength and aggressivity. Emotions versus rationality. A verbal attitude against an analytical attitude. Women are sweet, men are tough. Women are caring. This is very important in terms of choosing subjects, for example, and choosing what kind of job women do even when they work. They choose jobs that have to do with care. While men tend to be self-accomplishing. I'm talking about stereotypes, not actual women and men. Women tend to take care of practical needs. Men tend to think of in terms of abstract ideals. Women are dependent, men are independent. Women value beauty. In women, beauty is more valued than it is in men, while intelligence and power are more on the masculine pole. And of course, women can't drive parking, especially while men drive fast and furious. This turns, the passages from education to the social-political space is sustained through non-stop education and stereotypes throughout our lives. And this leads to a difference to the difference that she described in social-political terms. Women tend to occupy the private domain, traditionally the house, while men, the rest, the public domain. Women tend to pick up jobs related to care and practical needs, while men tend to take up jobs related to the social community, especially in a leading position in decision-making. This leads women to take up unpaid or less paid work, while men tend to take up more paid work. And whether all women were, by definition, sisters, because they all had essentially the same experiences, and because all women faced a common oppression by all men. The white woman asserted that the fact that they were both women bonded them, in spite of racial differences. The black woman disagreed. "When you wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, what do you see?" she asked. "I see a woman," replied the white woman. That's precisely the problem, responded the black woman. I see a black woman. To me, race is visible every day because race is how I am not privileged in our culture. Race is invisible to you because it's how you are privileged. It's why there will always be differences in our experience. As I witnessed this exchange, this is Kimmel speaking, I was startled and groaned, more audibly perhaps than I had intended. Someone asked what my response meant. Well, I said, when I look in the mirror, I see a human being. I'm universally generalizable. As a middle-class white man, I have no class, no race, no gender. I'm the generic person. And he goes on saying, I went to give a guest lecture for female colleagues at my university. We teach the same course and alternate semesters. So she always gives a guest lecture for me, and I do one for her. As I walked in the auditorium, one student looked up at me and said, oh, finally an objective opinion. All that semester, whenever my female colleague opened her mouth, what this student saw was a woman, biased. But when I walked in, I was, in the student's eyes, unbiased on objective opinion, disembodied Western rationality, standing right in front of the class. This notion that middle-class white men are objective and everyone else is biased is the way that inequalities are reproduced. Why? Because the very processes that...
Thanks very much. I know that it's sometimes a bleak picture, but I also think that we can find, a reason to be more aware of these issues and try to have an impact in our everyday life and beyond, hopefully.
The gender as a power relation is the eat that men just don't get.
And because I work in development, I know this, but basically, I don't know if you know about the Millennium Development Goals. They are expiring in 2015, and the UN is working out what to do next, and having gender disaggregated data finally will be a big feature of this new development framework, which is likely to be universal, which means that also northern rich countries like Italy are likely, we're not sure, but they're likely to have some goals to reach as well. And if gender features strongly in that, then it could mean that change could be driven in Italy as well from an international kind of global perspective. The other quick thing I wanted to say is that, following from what Alberic has explained to us, it's really important that we look at the structures that are hindering, progress in gender equality, because there is a lot of rhetoric in Italy as well, but again, it's a global thing, about increasing female participation in the workforce, because that's going to put the GDP up, so PIL, the wealth of a nation. I think in Italy they're saying if we reach European average of women employed, which is around 60% or just over 60, then we're going to get like 13 points of GDP. GDP is going to go up by 13%, which is, amazing. So there is a lot of rhetoric around this, but are we really looking at the conditions and what women are doing, at the unpaid care economy, the reproductive labor that women do in the house, the child care? What does it mean to have more women in the workforce without really addressing the structural issues? I think that we have to be, really aware of this, and it's not something that is talked about in Italy at all. I think we're all aware of this. I think, again, another feature of the Italian situation, which is, as already said, but this is just conceptualized as a women's problem. It's a problem of women that they need to be careful not to need an abortion, because 80% of gynecologists in my region, in Veneto, are conscious objectors, so they're not going to give one to you to provide abortion. It's a problem of women not to end up in abusive relationships and get killed by their own partner. It's their problem to change mainstream media and pop culture so that it gives a more nuanced and a more respectful depiction of women. I think it's so pervasive, and we feel it in our lives so much that there is really a need to be aware of how these messages are playing with us in our lives as well, and what we can do to start changing things from our own family, our own workplace, and our own friends and networks. So thanks very much. I know that it's sometimes a bleak picture, but I also think that we can find a risk very much. I know that it's sometimes a bleak picture, but I also think that we can find a reason to be more aware of these issues and try to have an impact in our everyday life and beyond, hopefully.